So before starting, I just wanted to understand a little bit more on your profiles and something fun dealing with it. So we keep talking, that NFTs are going to moon, crypto is going to the moon, but you actually worked on something towards the moon. So tell us a little bit on that.
Yeah, so during my undergrad, I took up like admissions in mechanical engineering, but I kind of liked electrical and computer science and putting everything together. And the only opportunity that I had at that time was like working on autonomous systems. And being an undergrad, you couldn't work on autonomous cars. That was too early for that. And so robotics, like one of the, kind of a couple of people came together and said like, hey, let's build a Mars rover. And then we started a team, and then we've been doing fairly well. Like we are placed in like top 5 in the world for the last 3 years now.
Pretty good beginnings from early on in the
Yes.
undergrad.
Yeah.
And about you, like your journey into being in the NLP side, how did that start?
Yeah, I actually got interested in research in undergrad, and for some reason, I wanted to be working in something which has, very deep connection to the physical world. So, but also interested in computer science. I just joined this lab where we worked on data mining for spatiotemporal phenomena. So we were trying to model how foodborne illnesses like salmonellosis spread through space and time, which was, during this time, I actively avoided working in NLP because I really felt like, this is something which would be much more impactful. But I was so wrong. In grad school, I was introduced to the NLP group there at Columbia, and and now most of my professional career has been in NLP. So huge, and I think in hindsight, the best decision ever.
So from avoiding NLP to NLP,
Yeah,
and both of you are in
absolutely.
healthcare. So talking a little bit on the work from last year on especially the multilingual natural language generation benchmark as well as on interactive writing assistants, could you give a little insight into now that ChatGPT is out and everybody is building their own
Right.
versions, how do you evaluate them
For
like how would you benchmark and evaluate them?
Right. So I think last year when we were organizing the workshop, it was still, ChatGPT was not out there, and writing assistance by itself was still a very new field, even though everyone had realized how effective large language models are on all kind of text editing tasks. But yes, it's a very, like text editing is a very complex process. We have to balance a lot of different trade-offs while editing text. How do we stick to our style? How do we ensure the narrative is coherent? How do we ensure it's fluent and so on? And that kind of, these are many things that a human has to keep in mind while writing, and that's why it ends up being an iterative process. And with things like ChatGPT or any large language models for text editing or revision, I think we are in a very interesting time, in a very interesting space where not only we can sound the way we want, but also at the same time not have to worry about, are we grammatically correct? Is my style, it can sound like me and so on. So I think it's a very exciting time.
And what are the metrics you use to check it?
It really depends on the task. For grammaticality, there's a lot of automatic metrics that have been proposed for, let's say, style transfer or paraphrasing. Meaning change, factuality, groundedness are some of the things that we really need to care about. Then there's readability to ensure, your text is, whatever you're writing has to be at the level of either the audience, basically. So yeah, there are a lot of automated metrics, but at the same time, now with these large language models, generating, like you give it 3 words, it'll generate a paragraph. It has obviously become harder, and automatic metrics are not sufficient. So most of the tasks and systems, we will need to rely on human evaluations or expert evaluations. So it has to be, I think eventually it'll be a combination of the two, like RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. Mm-hmm. That's what has really led to the advancement called ChatGPT. So I think, yeah, that'll become really significant as we go forward.
Neat. So today we have, most of the talks are going to talk about the techniques that have been used for building these applications. So we can probably save ourselves from talking on that, but maybe talk about then how to build applications out of that can help consumers. So one of them basically being like, what are the challenges and especially the feasibility that it would come to building these applications and even deploying them so it values for a customer?
Yeah, there are a lot of dimensions to the challenges and feasibility. There's obviously the engineering aspect of it. Does a company that wants to use large language models, do they rely on just the APIs provided by OpenAI or whichever company that provides these services? But then we get into concerns like cost. Every query is expensive. There are concerns about privacy. Are we sending our users' data to these third-party companies? And the data, if any product or company that cares about privacy will think a lot before doing that. And then obviously there's training infrastructure, inference infrastructure. There are concerns about bias, generating harmful content. So yeah, there are, each of these I think warrants a separate discussion of its own.
Yeah, and coming from a medical domain, I can say is like how the end user will react to it also matters a lot. So let's say you have an end-to-end model in which you feed in certain images. Maybe you're detecting cancer and you get a prompt which basically generates a report at the end. Now, if you take this model and give it to the surgeon immediately and show him, hey, I think this is the report, and maybe attach a couple of like clinical studies saying that why AI is better than pathologist or radiologist. What most of the surgeons would do is they would say, hey, can you go back and re-verify what you have said? Mm-hmm. Then our second thing what they would do is just look at the input data, because they do have a knack for like looking at the correct information, and they would verify whether the output that you have generated or the generative AI has generated is in line with their understanding of the problem. So understanding like this is kind of in medical domain is kind of very important. And second thing is they might also have like additional questions is like when you develop these models, this large language models, is like what data was it trained on? Because the medical field keeps on evolving, and latest advances can have an immediate impact. And they, if your language model was trained like 2 years back, then of course searching on that is not going to add value. It's going to be disastrous, because you can have certain drugs which might have entered the market, but their risks are not known. Mm-hmm. And so in that situation, you would want to refer to the latest research that has come out of for that particular drug. So this like relating to data and like essentially like even like the correctness of it is like what recommendation has been given. Does it in line with the current medical practices?
So I think you probably have seen this a lot, the whole question of explainability versus accuracy. Mm-hmm. And you choose which direction you want to go in. But in that medical field application, that goes like way more critical. Maybe you can provide some color there.
Yeah, so I think and it depends on, like, we have very strict regulations in the United States that are set by FDA. And if you are making like life-changing decisions for certain individuals based on the predictions of AI, then you need to have explainability. And a lot of our customers, they do ask for explainability. But it's not sort of always needed. Like, for example, there are around 4,800 drugs, like commonly prescribed drugs, which we don't know how they actually work, but then we have randomized clinical trials. And we know that, okay, they work. But in certain cases, let's say you're looking for like cancer segmentations, like it's in, you want to look at like certain heat maps, you want to look at lesions and stuff like that, which basically tells like, hey, if I diagnose this person, like if somebody like a clinical pathologist or a radiologist say that there is something that needs intervention, can I pinpoint at that specific location and have that? So that's where the explainability kind of really helps. But explainability at the cost of accuracy is probably the worst decision that AI teams can make, because your models can be explainable, but you can rationalize a decision, but it doesn't have to be right. And so if your model accuracy is low and you go forward with like models that are more explainable at the cost of accuracy, then users will discard your product. And in medicine, you will have to go into corrective and preventive action. So in medicine, it does happen that you have an AI application that predicts cancer and stuff like that. And sometimes there is a disagreement between what the clinical pathologists think and what your AI predicted. And then, you have to go for secondary examination in that case. It's like, why is there there's no coherence between the AI and that? And in that case, if your AI fails, then you have to come up with extensive studies and say that, hey, why my AI failed in that particular situation. So I feel it depends on the application, and sometimes there is also a black box, like we say, like, oh, this deep neural networks are like black box things, so people don't understand it. And sometimes it just helps that people don't understand it, because then people, like in medicine, if they don't understand how things are working, what they would do is, like, if there is this disagreement in what they think the outcome should be and what the prediction of the AI is, they'll default to their own clinical judgment. And that is what we want the surgeons or the clinical pathologists to do.
You're being basically an assistant to the surgeon instead of just giving a report to a customer, and a 2% false rate in someone's cancer diagnosis is pretty bad. I think I got a bite-sized version of this. While I was at Microsoft Research, I was making an app for the blind community, and as I never knew the law, it kind of becomes a medical device. And when something becomes a medical device, it means a lot of paperwork. And I became a part-time lawyer just going through this. So my training time of doing the AI work was like way, way, way reduced. So I get that why you need to have like a really clear understanding to the person you're showcasing how to explain. Now, explaining things, talk about explaining generative models.
Right. So as Shubham mentioned, it really depends on the application. So for any writing use cases, there's a spectrum. On one hand, as what Richard was talking about in search, everything that's generated for a search query has to be backed up by some fact or some URL on the internet. And on the other hand, there's what people have been using ChatGPT for a lot, automating mundane writing tasks. For example, writing an out-of-office email or a sick note or something like that, where it's maybe like a relatively low-stakes writing task, but and we don't really need any explainability. It's a pretty standard templated language that needs to be generated. So Yeah, and but in the middle somewhere there is this. You could think of this one use case where I have to maybe respond to an email from the CEO with facts. Okay, what are the, I don't know, what's the engagement rate and so on, where if you ask ChatGPT or any other large language model, they will gladly hallucinate facts. So I think there's this, it really depends on the application. And yeah, that's where I think, on one hand, it's still a growing area of research. I remember the Lambda paper by Google, they tried to address this to some extent, I think they called it groundedness or something, where they fine-tuned the model to even generate the URL from which it was generating the output. But then they noticed that these models get so good that they start hallucinating even URLs. So yeah, there's a long way to go.
I think Richard was also mentioning that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I was a developer and trying to build a startup and I see one of those exciting APIs, the first question is, oh, how can I use it? And the second question is, how can I personalize it? I think that's like the second question that comes over in most times. We might not yet be at the place where we can personalize these, but would you have just general comments on, do you even need to? And if we had to, maybe that's a future.
Yeah.
Like, what's the challenge there?
Yeah. I also asked the same question to Richard from a search perspective. But yeah, so given we've seen the remarkable zero-shot, few-shot learning capabilities of of large language models of the order of a few hundreds of billions of parameters, and it's pretty easy for someone to, let's say, give their texts to any of these large language models, and it can start generating text in a similar style. But doing so for, let's say, the order of hundreds of millions of users is going to be prohibitive. So we are going to need some really remarkable innovation to scale this. So yeah, like personalization is what is going to be required as ChatGPT now reached 100 million users. More and more people will realize that for the non-trivial writing use cases where, not the sick note, but the reply email to the CEO with facts, people are increasingly realizing that the generated text is more templated and, kind of mundane language. It does not reflect their cultural context or, their writing style, or even is not able to insert knowledge. So that is something that is going to become more and more important as we go forward.
So a common strategy some startups use is that, hey, use one of these open APIs,
right?
Get enough users, and then based on the data, then have different distinctive domains.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the domains could be fine-tuned just because they are big enough, but maybe not all the way to the user.
Yes, exactly.
So talking about some of these applications that people are building, would there be, maybe I'll start with you, like some exciting applications you think of generative AI that you are excited about?
Yeah, in medical domain, we have started experimenting the last, good papers have started coming up in the last 6 months or so, especially using stable diffusion. So one of the biggest problems we face in medical AI is, first of all, we have huge constraints with respect to how much data privacy. And then there are certain diseases which have very low occurrences. One of them is in breast cancer detection is angiosarcoma, which has less than 1% chances of basically somebody having that. So can we develop, use this generative AI to actually generate this additional samples of data that we can use for training? So that is one major application that we are seeing in medicine. and even like until like you try to improve the system. There's also like another major one that's kind of coming in is I'm sorry, I'm just blank.
Yeah, okay. Similarly for you, like, have you seen something that you are excited about?
I think one really impactful thing, as Shubham said, is data, like addressing the data scarcity. So there are a lot of writing tasks or use cases where even before you train your first model, you're blocked by the availability of the right data set. And that's where we can leverage these few shot learning capabilities or emergent abilities where even with like even if you have a few tens or hundreds of data points, you can generate more data and maybe possibly train smaller models. I think this also ties in well with the previous question that we were discussing, how to scale out for different use cases. But to answer this question, like what am I excited about? I think multimodality is going to be a big thing because we have large language models that can really understand text really well. They can understand images really well. They can understand audio really well. So who knows? Given one sentence, a large multimodal foundational model could be able to generate entire videos. So maybe your next movie or your next influencer could be coming from a foundation model.
Actually, it got released last week.
Oh, it did?
Runway, which is basically AI for artists, it released this model called Gen 1. Last year, when Stable Diffusion was released, they were working with Stable Diffusion to at least build it for artists. And so they worked again to release Gen 1. And essentially, you can write a text prompt and see the video change in real time. So you bring your video of your dog in the grass field and basically get an astronaut going on moon. And it will literally start replicating this in close to real time. At least that's what I've seen. And it's even more impressive, the fact that artists now have the ability without having any knowledge of like what the underlying things are. Exactly. Really shows that 10x value.
Exactly. And to build on that, now any large language model could be used for co-editing, co-writing, co-composing for like maybe music or co-editing video or co-creating art, as you said. So I think the possibilities we're just getting started.
True. Yeah. And just to add to the word co, so GitHub Copilot, it synthesizes 40% of the code it's synthesizing is being used by programmers. They accept it and put it in. That's a huge number, but that's again the co part, which is like, it's called Copilot. It's in the name. So another thought is sometimes people develop applications which are based on someone else's API. Mm-hmm. And the question that arises is like, where is the moat if anybody can, utilize? Maybe you might have some examples.
Yeah, it's also very much related to who owns the work. Not just like what's the moat, but if I've written an essay, am I the author or is GPT-3 the author, or are we co-authors? Similarly, is Copilot responsible for any bugs that are caused in the code? So I think that's a very interesting question. But when it comes to the mode, I think it again will depend on the applications. For some, it could be the specific domain they're in. Maybe they're the first movers, have the most user base, and can address or solve a user case better than nobody else can. For some, it could be their own large language models that they have built. For some, I think data will always be another mode. So I think these are the three different ones that that I think are going to be differentiators. So like Jasper, for example, does really well at marketing copy. OpenAI, Cohere are providing their own large language models. And then there will be others who will maybe double down on privacy, that, okay, we have our own large language model and we have our own user base, and we solve this particular maybe personalization problem really well. So I think it'll be a combination of these.
It's interesting you mentioned Jasper because it raised, it's valued $1.5 billion now. And within that first year, it earned $80 million. But the point is they started out at least using OpenAI's API, showcase the value that it can get in a particular domain. And now obviously they have a science team and others, but just getting those users can be a decent enough mode to work on. Possibly,
yeah. And there will be, and now it's hard to predict how how successful like that model will be, because the barrier to replicate a functionality like that is reducing. So that's why I think it will come down to quality then and the overall user experience and things like that as well.
I know a few folks who recently, there's an email extension called Abby. It's basically a Chrome extension. You go in, you go to Gmail and start writing your email, and it will use the OpenAI's capability to write an email for you. Nice. Students who built it very quickly, but they reverse engineered to essentially start multiple Amazon, like there's no API for ChatGPT. So what they did is they started multiple virtual machines in the cloud, pretending to be human browsers and opening OpenAI to like work as an API. Build that Chrome extension, put it on Twitter. Elon Musk tweets it, 13 million views, and now they are looking at people calling them back for investments, all within 2-week period. So that kind of showcases the power of like just getting it done, being first to market, and.
It reminds me of this meme. Basically, a job applicant is using ChatGPT to create, a cover letter for a recruiter, and it generates a really nice, very colorful language. I'm extremely passionate about this. These are my, my experience and so on. It'll generate a really long and nice cover letter. It goes to the recruiter. Recruiter is also using one of these large language models to summarize them. And all the recruiter sees is, John really wants this job, interview him. So we essentially get into this situation where the large language model is kind of critiquing itself. Students use it to write essays, teachers use it to grade essays.
So another evidence that BuzzFeed used to make stories is just out of this API, literally. Cool. So I think I'll move to something that you have a lot of experience with, which is the infrastructure side of getting these models to run. So there's a whole range from like the hugest servers to IoT models. So could you talk a little bit on like serving and angles that different dimensions you see by serving this?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we start with like in medical domain, we have the user privacy, and it's not just users who are worried about it, but it's also the hospitals and all the people who are kind of involved with patient healthcare. And so what happens is like when you kind of go and deploy this models, or you want to deploy these models, you'll have this kind of a major constraint saying that, hey, we do not want to transmit that data out. And when they mean that they do not want that, they don't want that data to be transmitted, is like they don't want to store that data as well. So you have this unique problem is that you're doing some processing, but it has to be on the edge. And also there are other constraints as well, as like you can have infrastructure constraints, as like you cannot hog the entire bandwidth of an hospital, right? They'll have objections to that. And at the same time, even if you have to transmit data back to certain servers, we have like certain time frames where like, the congestion is bare minimum so that we can transmit data to a central server. So there is this huge privacy constraint and being able to deploy, and that's why there is this huge push towards like edge IoT devices. And at the same time, the patients also feel quite comfortable saying that, hey, we are not transmitting any data back. We are just analyzing this information. Second thing is like, you have in federated learning, which has kind of caught up in the last 3 years. And that has really helped in the medical domain because you have like all these clinics like scattered across the country which are using different methods. They are using different drugs. They are using different reagents and stuff like that. And it really becomes difficult to generalize these models and to come up with a global one. And even if you come up with a global model, it's not going to help the case because you're not exclusively or a very target specific. Mm-hmm. So federated learning has been like a great sort of a blessing in a sense in medical domain where we are able to sort of be privacy preserving, at the same time have a very localized effect of our machine learning models.
I probably believe in my assumption, the world's biggest federated model is the one within Google Assistant, the Google keyboard with 1 billion plus users. So every night when we are charging the phone, it's essentially downloading some of the local training exercises happen there, then it sends it back. So it never knows my credit card number, but at least it has still decent amount of personalization that it's able to bring there. And you might have also seen the on-device side of things. Maybe you can give some color there.
Yeah, similar to the mobile use case. It's as models keep getting bigger, everything moves to the server side. There will also be a big need to provide the same experiences without, in a faster way, in a privacy-preserving way. So I think one big area of research that I would expect is to how to make these not large models, but even mid-sized. Now even like a few hundreds of million parameters are not classified as large language models, but yes, something of the order of sub 1 billion parameters. Can those be compressed, pruned, distilled, and brought on device so that similar high quality use cases can be provided to users in a privacy preserving way?
So one trend I've seen is, a good example is Apple on the iPhone. You can imagine that if everybody here in the room was a mobile developer, you would go and build your model, ship it. That's like 100, 200 MB. Then you would do it, then you would do it, then you would do it. And if you download all of our apps, this will already hog up the space on the mobile phone. So what Apple has done is in iOS itself, they ship the core foundational models. So example like BERT, ResNet. So they ship one of those models and then let developers just ship the final layers that they can fine tune. So and as little as 50 KB, you can share the final dense layers in the app and not have to take up all that space. And in fact, most developers don't even have to know how to train AI because they can use the create ML GUI to build and ship that. So obviously, I would imagine one of the bigger models starting to get into the mobile phone and working. Phones have obviously become much. As a developer, you want to ship experiences which cover till like the last 4 years, because 4 years worth is about 95% of a user's use case. So a lot of another angle to think is the degradation experience. So maybe some of the later phones can be based on that on-device really fast experience, but the previous years could be based on cloud, maybe not the graceful degradation. That's, I think, the key term I'm looking for. Also, there's all the hardware accelerators that are in the market. You might have some ideas on that too.
Yeah, I think all of these, it's not just this, one thing which will be like end all be all, but yes, all of these different advancements that will have to come together to make it happen. Obviously, there are all these techniques to make the models smaller and smaller while preserving quality, distillation, quantization, and pruning and so on, there will be more kind of distributed learning frameworks like federated learning and as you said, shipping one foundation model, but also, yes, even inference there are advancement in inference that will also have to complement this, especially for, to begin with these, as more and more tools and applications they ship, they are based off of large language models or kind of the range of 1 to 10 billion parameters. Even those are currently quite expensive. So as specialized hardware, like maybe the new G5 instances on AWS or TPUs, as they become more and more ubiquitous and cheaper, I think this will keep getting accelerated.
I think, you have AWS Inferentia, which has come out. GraphCore is another example, which just accelerate the whole experience. Worst case, you have the CPU available to do things. I'll actually piggyback on, we went from like really small models to really big models. So one of the case studies was at Pinterest, where they noticed that as you increase the model size, you will also get an increase in the user engagement and all the metrics that people are looking at. Obviously, it's not linear, but every small percentage increment can potentially be millions of dollars. So they ended up with a technique where they could ship 100x the size of their original production models while not having any cost implications. So it was almost like free lunch in the inference side. There is a blog you can search for. It was pretty trendy 2-3 months ago on 100x model sizes shipped by Pinterest in work with NVIDIA. And in fact, there's a recording of that because that session was happening at 11 o'clock, so you can see that later. Now, I want to end this. We also always want to look at that future, the glorious future where things will be. I won't want you to say things which will never come out true and have an egg, but what would be like the general trends you think in the more that you foresee coming up?
I think with everything changing so fast, every 2 weeks, predictions become old.
Absolutely.
So maybe not like, I don't think I'd make predictions for, a year from now, but like at least a few months from now, I think this whole aspect of a large language model really understanding a user or their context and really kind of coming in at the right time and inserting the right facts or context will become more and more important because there's only so much productivity one can gain from being able to generate, being able to get some generic vanilla text for relatively low effort. So I'll go back to this use case of maybe writing an email to this, CEO of the company with the right facts. Can it really understand what I'm trying to say and insert factually correct information with the right tone, with the right level of fluff in the email? Maybe the recipient of the email does not like a lot of pleasantries, or maybe they just, they do like an email, they do respond to an email when it contains some pleasantries like, hope you had a great weekend or something like that. Or maybe if a meeting is being scheduled, can a large language model insert my availability at the right place? Maybe I'm talking to somebody with a very different cultural context, and I use some idiom or something or some expression which they may not understand. Can it translate that properly so that what I'm writing is is much better consumable? So all of these things, I think this whole aspect of injecting user context and knowledge will become is pretty important as we go forward. And while doing that, it has to be balanced with the responsible aspect of AI. Not we know a lot of jailbreaking or prompt like giving malicious prompts to ChatGPTs so as to make it not follow the kind of the right set of actions. So I think that limiting the bias, misinformation, I think that has to go hand in hand with kind of these kinds of advancements.
I think it's the knowledge injection which makes it so unreal looking now compared to like just being a stochastic parrot. Now, based on your answers, my prediction is you'll predict something about healthcare.
Yeah, that just keeps on running my head. So I think that in coming, like looking into the trends, I feel like we'll have those models which are very specific, like domain specific. In healthcare, for example, like if you go for a diagnosis, let's say you're looking at like a breast cancer detection and stuff like that. Just saying that which particular variant exists, for example, if it's triplet negative or things like that, is not enough. You also have to say is like, hey, angiosarcoma was not present, or the other variants were not present, which is as equivalent of saying like, you have a stable diffusion model, you have a cat, an image of a cat, and then you say, well, there is not elephant present, and it looks like a tiger or a lion, but I think, some other user can mistake a cat for other feline, but it's definitely a cat. And so certain kind of this kind of jargons, or the way certain industries are used to like looking at certain explanations or certain prompts, I think it would be like you require a certain amount of like fine tuning for specific applications. And I think the second trend, which is kind of important, is kind of giving those references. I mean, the correctness of the fact that, if the model gives me a prompt, is how much should I trust it? There was one study that happened last year. This was by it was on cancer recognition, and it was published in Nature Medicine, where the AI would basically help the radiologist or pathologist basically tell like, hey, if there is a presence of cancer or not. But it kind of, you would say that, because they are working in conjunction, the performance would improve. But what we saw is like the entire performance actually deteriorates when AI and humans kind of work together, because what happens is if the model predicts something correct, then pathologists tend to believe that without actually looking into the factual statements. And so you might have like a very high true positive rate, but then you are falling back on certain metrics. So overall, you're good without an AI sometimes. And I feel in coming times, having those factual information embedded, saying that, hey, I'm not sure about certain things, or I think there is a 60% chance of this, there is a 30% chance of this, can you please go for a secondary examination, is going to be of a great value.
That's fair. I predict essentially that all the investors who were investing in NFTs and crypto will come back to AI now that it's finally in hype and be slightly late in the game. I do want to say the Amara's law, which is that we usually grossly overestimate things in the short term and grossly underestimate things in the long term, applies quite well in any of these future predictions. So I'm going to come here next year and like send a LinkedIn message asking how did it go. So thanks for joining us for this session today. Lunch will be served outside in the networking area, and we'll be back here at 2 p.m. For questions, we'll be just here, so you can swing by and ask. And thank you for joining us.